We hold these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office, experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
For insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all, in-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold
these truths. We hold these truths.
with Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
Okay, is the government spying on us? Everybody wants to know that. It's often a topic of conversation, and the word FISA comes up a lot in that conversation. So for those of you listening, I'm here with Chairman Mike Turner and Representative Darin LaHood, both of which serve on the Intelligence Committee with me. Of course, the chairman is the chairman of the Intelligence Committee. And Darin here was part of the working group that has worked tirelessly to come up with some compromises, both across our own party and across the Democrat Party, on FISA reforms that need to happen. But we really got to start from the beginning here. What the heck is FISA, and specifically FISA Section 702? Either one of you can answer that, or we can answer collectively as we talk about it.
Well, FISA stands for, in short, it's the Foreign Surveillance Act. It's the law in which governs the intelligence community's spying on foreigners. And 702 is where we authorize and regulate the intelligence community's spying on foreigners located abroad. And those two components are incredibly important. They have to be foreigners and they have to be located abroad. So, for example, if it does not include spying on Americans, doesn't include spying on anyone who's in the United States, even foreigners who come here. But it's obviously important for national security, because the way in which we know what our national security threats are by looking at what our adversaries are doing, what people who intend to do us harm. And in the 702, we target about 250,000 foreigners located abroad who are our most significant national security threats. So, for example, we don't use 702 to spy on Paul McCartney. We spy on Hezbollah. We spy on Hamas. We spy on ISIS. Those people wish to do us harm. And that forms a critical basis upon which, and a foundation upon which, a lot of our other intelligence programs are based.
Okay, so what if you wanted to spy on Paul McCartney, or what if like an analyst, the NSA, wanted to spy on Paul McCartney, and they're the NSA, they have the power at their fingertips. I mean, what's to stop them from doing that? There's a court, right? There's a FISC.
Right. So in 702, the way that 250,000 are identified that are foreigners abroad that represent a national security threat is that the Intelligence Committee actually has to put together an overarching plan of how these people are identified, who they are, and they apply to the foreign court, to the Foreign Surveillance Court, U.S. Foreign Surveillance Court. And that court then reviews it. It's part of the federal judicial system. It's federal district court judges that sit there. They review this plan and approve it, and they would never approve Paul McCartney being in.
Yeah. All right. So we have a capability, right? We've got people who can hack into stuff, and then but there has to be an authority associated with that and a law governing that. So that's what FISA is, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. 702 is the specific part that talks about targeting foreign intelligence, or targeting foreigners for intelligence purposes. And so that's like, okay, that sounds good. Like, what's the problem? But Darin, maybe talk about what the problems are and why this is so controversial in the first place.
Well, first of all, I think the most important word in FISA is foreign. We are targeting foreigners overseas. That's number one. Not U.S. citizens here on our land. It's foreigners overseas. So that's number one. Number two, I think a little context on the history here. FISA was put in place in 1978, so it's been around a long time. Put in place to look at the bad guys around the world, people that want to harm America, our adversaries. So it's been in place since 1978. 702 was put in place in 2008 after 9/11 by the Bush administration, by Republicans, put in place. So because of technology and the advancement of technology, we needed to have another mechanism to look at that technology overseas. So 702 was put in place, passed by the Congress, been reauthorized twice now. Every 5 years, it has to be reauthorized. So 2013, we reauthorized it then. We looked at what had worked, what didn't work over that 5 years, and we fixed it. 2018, same thing. We reauthorized it then. This year, it is up for reauthorization again. And so that's what we're debating in the Congress right now through the Intelligence Committee and through the Judiciary Committee. And what we've looked at over the last 5 years as part of our oversight responsibility is, what can we fix? What can we make better? There has been some problems, as we know, over the last 5 years. What happened in the Trump administration through Crossfire Hurricane should never happen again. So what we've done in a collective way on the Intelligence Committee is looked at what do we need to fix? And so we've come up with a set of proposals to make it better, to reform it like we should do in government. And that's what we're talking about.
Let's talk about Crossfire Hurricane. Let's refresh people on what that is with Carter Page, because there's multiple controversies, and I think people think of this controversy as the controversy. It's not exactly correct, and it's not exactly the debate we're even having up here. So let's go over real quick what Crossfire Hurricane even was and why was it abuse.
Sure. Well, this goes back to the Trump-Clinton campaign, and that Hillary Clinton's campaign and the Democratic National Committee funded opposition research on Donald Trump, where they contracted with Christopher Steele, who was a Brit former intelligence officer, who basically made up this whole dossier. I mean, it has been discredited. It's been proven to contain information that's not true. That dossier, the Clinton campaign turned over to the FBI. The FBI walked into the FISA court and submitted it as if it was evidence, not opposition research from an opponent of someone who's running for president of the United States. Donald Trump was a candidate at that time for presidency, and sought a warrant authority to do surveillance of Carter Page, who had been associated with the Trump campaign. So in our bill, what we do is we make that not possible again. We make it illegal to put opposition research into the court. We appoint an attorney for Americans that are targeted under the court, which is a separate from 702 process. And we give people criminal penalties, 10 years. You do this, you go to the FISA court and you lie about American citizen and get a warrant for surveillance of the American citizen, you're going to jail and you're going to jail for 10 years. That ought to do it.
Is the process with that they used under Carter Page even considered 702?
No, it is Title I under FISA itself.
Yeah, I would just make the distinction. We're having this debate about fixing or reauthorizing 702. If we do nothing, Title I still stays in place. So those reforms that we need to make that happen in Crossfire Hurricane, nothing will change unless we change it.
About the ability of the FBI to conduct domestic surveillance the way they're supposed to for domestic law enforcement. People forget that. All right, so I'm going to do my best to summarize the other problem that people talk about. They don't rarely articulated correctly, but it is indeed an interesting gray area. And so maybe the analogy would be wiretap. So you think of the time before internet, and the FBI or the cops, they tap your phones. What does that mean? It means they're listening to your conversation. So you assume that if they're listening to your conversation, they're listening to your conversation with someone, and that someone is a person who doesn't technically have a warrant written, signed by a judge to spy on them. Their conversation with you is collected via the warrant that was derived from your case. Everybody knows that, I think. Everybody's also familiar with the fact that police, they run license plates. They see you driving kind of funny, they're going to run your license plate. And that there's a database full of license plates that they can access. They don't need a warrant for that license plate. So I want to put those two analogies out there before we even have the discussion. So in under FISA 702, we've established that you're collecting conversations on foreigners established via a court. They're off U.S. soil. Okay, but they're having a conversation with someone. And so that someone is usually other foreigners doing those bad things that we're, wondering about and therefore collecting on. Sometimes it's with a person who's actually from the U.S. in the U.S. citizen. So that's where it gets a gray area because, well, if you consider it a gray area, but you're very similar to the analogy of the wiretap at this point. And the question is that data searchable? Is it the right thing to do to be able to search it? If you're curious about U.S. citizens, or can you only look at it once you've derived it accidentally just by listening to that conversation? That's the summary of the problem we face, right?
Correct. I'll just put a little finer point on it and use an example. Take Qasem Soleimani, who was taken out by President Trump. Terrorist, led the Al-Quds force for the Iranians, killed many Americans. So when he was still alive, we monitored his communications, and we should overseas. And he spent most of his time throughout the Middle East. But if somebody from, say, Detroit sends him a text and says, I want to meet you in the Netherlands and we're going to execute our plan, that text message that was sent to him under 702 we can look at that text message. Now, if we want to go talk to him, arrest him, search us out, we have to get a search warrant under the Fourth Amendment to do that because he's on U.S. soil. But that text message that was in Soleimani's inbox, that is something that we have access to. In my view, we should have access to. We've had a bit of disagreement. Some of our colleagues think you ought to get a warrant. Now, what I would tell you, as part of this process, Dan, we have reached out to people we respect in national security. So over the last year, we've brought in John Radcliffe, former member of the Judiciary Committee, was President Trump's DNI. We brought in Robert O'Brien, head of national security for President Trump. Mike Pompeo, former head of CIA. Also, Kash Patel. We've had and Bill Barr. To a person, all of them have said getting a warrant for that text message in Soleimani's inbox would be devastating to national security. It wouldn't work. So that's what we're talking about. That's one example. We ought to have access to those text messages, communications, phone calls that are in the bad guys' phones or on their email.
We'll jump that a little bit. So to be clear, there's a difference in reforms and ideas for reforms. There's a problem with this search process that I kind of laid out, and with the problem being that if there's a database out there, even if they're well-intentioned, law enforcement might want to search it for a variety of reasons. Some of those could be well-intentioned, again, defensive reasons. They're worried that you're being talked about by foreign terrorists, and so they want to see if you were being like maybe a member of Congress. I don't know if you want to talk about that story, and maybe explain. But why don't you actually? So, because that's a good example of the potential problem.
Couple things. I bring a perspective to this. I'm a former federal prosecutor, so I worked in the Department of Justice as the chief terrorism prosecutor, and so in that role, I've used 702. I've used FISA information in terrorists, and I've seen the value that it's bringing in protecting national security. Secondarily, to your point, as a member of Congress, I was illegally and unlawfully queried by the FBI. This was brought out in our worldwide threats last year by, I talked to Director Wray, asked him specifically about it. So they inappropriately queried my name, the FBI. And this gets to the problem in the database. All of the problems, or I should say the vast majority of the problems, pertain to the FBI, having too many analysts, too many agents that are querying information, in my case, a sitting member of Congress. And so we called them out on that. So we're trying to figure out, how do you reform, fix, revise those type of things that shouldn't be happening on U.S. citizens? In our reform bill, we've addressed that.
Okay. Our reform bill, Chairman, what's our reform bill and what's the other reform bill? There's an Intelligence Committee reform bill that was largely agreed upon by Democrats, Republicans, and there's a judiciary reform bill, which is also agreed upon by Democrats and Republicans. Those Democrats that were like Jerry Nadler, Jayapal, I'm a little worried about us agreeing with them on something, but what's going on here?
Right. So as Darin was saying, and of course we greatly appreciate your work on the Intelligence Committee also, as the chairman of the working group, Darin pulled together the issues that we saw of where were the problems, where do we know that there are abuses? And then we had a discussion over what are the solutions. We came up with 40 different reforms that needed to occur. And these are reforms that former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has endorsed, former Director of Intelligence John Radcliffe have endorsed, that really go to the heart of the abuses that we saw in the FBI. These reforms do not inhibit our ability to do collection on foreigners located outside the United States who pose a national security threat, or our ability to use the information to make certain that people in the United States remain safe. And as Darin was pointing out, if someone is communicating with Hamas or Hezbollah outside of the United States, foreigners, known terrorists that are located outside the United States, they do not have a constitutional protection to privacy for that communication.
Now, let's be clear though, that communication, but people should know that doesn't mean they're looking at your inbox.
Right. You have no ability to go from that terrorist's information. If an American sends, as Darin was describing, if an American sends an email to the head of Hamas, that email will be in the head of Hamas's inbox. Mm-hmm. If he sends a reply, it'll be in his outbox. You don't have an ability to go from the head of Hamas or Hezbollah or ISIS's data into an American. And if you need to go see this, you have to go and get a warrant for that located in the United States. But the judiciary bill cripples the ability to be able to do that collection for foreigners located outside the United States, and the ability to use the information to protect Americans in the United States. The Wall Street Journal ran an editorial just this week endorsing our bill and identifying specifically that the judiciary bill would cripple this program. Our goal was reform it, make it harder for people to abuse the program, but make certain that the portion of it that's Darin was saying is post 9/11 that has worked to keep us safe is certainly functioning and keeps America safe.
Dan, I would just add a couple things that I think it's no coincidence that we've had no terrorist attacks like 9/11 in the last 20 years because of 702 in place. That's number one. Number two, the reforms that Chairman Turner has been leading on, I put them into three buckets. How do we hold the FBI accountable and make sure what happened in Crossfire Hurricane never happens again? So what did we do? We added a provision that now there's an independent lawyer appointed in the FIS court. And so now if that Crossfire Hurricane application is brought to the FIS court, an independent lawyer, almost like a public defender, will be attached and be able to review that. Crossfire Hurricane application never would have got beyond that if our reforms were in place. Number two, we add 6 criminal penalties under the Federal Criminal Code that hold FBI agents accountable. That's not currently in there. So any of those FBI agents, whether it's Peter Strzok or the others that were involved with it, McCabe, all those, they would be subject to criminal penalties, not internal rules violations within the FBI.
That's crucial. That's what people complain about most. Where's the accountability? Well,
So
it's not against the law.
And they got to present this. They're now going to be criminally liable, what's never been done before. And lastly is, how do we bring more transparency into the FIS court, the secretive court? We now ask for transcripts. There's no transcripts for any of these. We now require in ours to have transcripts, a lawyer involved. We're going to have somebody that it gets reports on a monthly basis to the Judiciary Committee and the Intel Committee from the FIS court.
Those all seem good. And now let's go back to the Judiciary Committee talking points and the criticisms and what's out there, because, from our perspective, their bill certainly ends FISA as we know it, right? It throws the baby out with the bathwater, and they'll say nice words like, well, civil liberties, Fourth Amendment, we're just protecting your right to prevent the government from unlawful search and seizure. We're the good guys. They're the bad. We're the real conservatives. I don't know if real conservatives and Jerry Nadler go together very well, but that's the argument being made. The reason I want to do this podcast this week, we were supposed to vote on all this stuff this week, ended up maybe not doing that. So we'll continue this debate. But this week there was an internal debate within the conference. Y'all were a part of that. Describe how that conversation has gone, and do your best to steel man the other side's arguments and what they're saying about their bill.
Yeah, so the beginning of our discussion, we talked about that their bill restricts collection, bad guys outside the United States, and the use of the information, the ability to use the information in the United States to be able to protect American citizens. There's 3 other things that their bill does that are really have very negative consequences. And Heritage Action, when they put up their description of their bill, acknowledged the first one, and that is they expand the definition of individuals who have rights under the 702 process. Our current statutes say that a United States citizen or an individual who is a lawful permanent resident are not to be collected on. It doesn't matter if they're in the United States, it doesn't matter if they're located abroad, if they're on vacation, there's not to be a collection that targets citizens or permanent residents. Their bill takes it farther. It protects illegal aliens, anyone in the United States.
Yeah, you're in the space. So a cartel member who infiltrates our southern border, he's off limits now because he's right. You need a warrant.
Right,
This is a foreign infiltrator.
Right. There's a second category. There's illegal aliens, and there's a second category in theirs that get additional protections, and that's individuals that travel into or out of the United States. So the president of Iran comes into the United Nations and makes an address. He leaves and goes back to Tehran and takes constitutional rights with him in Tehran. So you're suddenly in a different situation where illegals and the individuals traveling in and outside the United States, that the data that they generated when they were not in the United States is now protected, and they have full constitutional rights. A second category, which is even more troubling, is they restrict the use of the information within the United States to pursue people for illegal crimes. They get rid of rape, murder, kidnapping, crimes against children, including pornography, human trafficking. There's no reason why these as offenses should be protected.
So to kind of
if
give an
they did.
example of that, again, so people understand, random U.S. citizen happens to, their conversations about child trafficking happen to be collected lawfully as we're collecting on a foreigner who's, say, in Mexico. According to their bill, you basically have to pretend like you never saw that.
Right. So exactly. That individual in the United States, if they're corresponding with someone and wanting to engage in human trafficking or child trafficking, their communications would not be able to be used if they were intercepted by the intelligence community by targeting this person that's foreign and outside the United States to go prosecute the person in the United States. It's abhorrent. These individuals do not deserve protection.
No. And when you have these arguments, I mean, does the other side realize the consequences of these matters? I mean, because I can definitely see how Democrats would write some of this.
Right, because Democrats are defund the police. They want to restrict the ability to prosecute people.
I don't understand how our conservatives are for it.
I have no idea how they agreed to this. But one thing that Darin has said, which is really important, is his work as a prosecutor. He's done work where this information has been used to keep Americans safe. A person who's in the United States who's communicating with people outside the United States about human and child trafficking is likely committing crimes in their own neighborhood and in their own community. We need to be able to keep the community safe.
Dan, I would if you look at the people that are supporting the judiciary bill, the ACLU is supporting it. That should tell you a lot right there. But the people, whether it's Senator Ron Wyden, Zoe Lofgren, Jerry Nadler, Sheila Jackson Lee, I mean, these are progressive Jayapal, the head of the progressives. These are the people supporting that. That should tell you everything.
Red alarms all over the place.
The conservatives that we respect, that have worked in national security, that have been in the room, that have worked for President Trump, Trey Gowdy, Kash Patel, John Ashcroft, the former Attorney General, all agree definitively the warrant requirement does not work. That's why they support our bill.
Yeah, and let's specify the warrant requirement. We went through a long list of kind of dangerous things about expanding the I guess the data set or the data set that's excluded from collection. The warrant, maybe the audience might not understand exactly what we mean by warrant, exactly what that would mean for an analyst.
Let me take a big shot at this. So we're collecting on foreigners located abroad, right? We collect their data. You've got, let's say, their email account, or let's say their phone information. We have their text. Let's just deal with their text. As you had said, if someone inside the United States is communicating with that terrorist, they're located in their text. We can't get to the person in the United States text. We don't want to. That's a warrant process. But when you're dealing with the data of the foreigner, just like in your phone, you want to go to the top of the search bar. You don't want to read everything. You want to go to the search bar, and in the search bar, you type in names, you type in information that gives you an ability to sort and read that information of the terrorist abroad. That search is called a query under the laws for 702. The judiciary bill imposes a warrant to do a search. Now, you can read everything that's in there, but if you want to because again, the Democrats want to inhibit prosecution. So they want to make it more difficult to use this information. They want you to not be able to use the search bar.
Yeah, which the entire query process would have to disappear at that point. I think people need to understand that when you're targeting bad guys, so this is the part where maybe I understand a little bit more now. In the military, we're targeting foreign bad guys on foreign lands. We don't go through a court process. It's not completely true because we tried to get the Iraqis and the Afghanis to go through a court process. So there was something. But for our lawful purposes, there wasn't. So we're constantly targeting, and that we're constantly targeting means you're constantly running different data sets. You're deriving information from different kinds of intelligence, and you're putting it together. And it'd be extremely strange and very prohibitive if you had to ask somebody's permission just to search a database. That would be a strange thing to do. And again, I think we have to go back to the analogies of whether it's a license plate reader. Or running a license plate in a database. Forget about license plates. There's a million things that law enforcement runs through databases just to start an investigation. But I think the better analogy is still the wiretap. In an old school wiretap, you can't just pretend you didn't hear what the other person on the phone said. You can't pretend you didn't hear it. And that's the way we've been doing things for a long time, and everyone's been pretty comfortable with it. There's not a lot of reason to believe this should be any different. There's not practice. So it's not only not legally necessary, I would say, but it's completely impractical and impossible to decide that you want a warrant for that side of the conversation, whether it's a text message, an email, or a conversation.
Right, because information, this terrorist data, let's say again, their text messages that we lawfully have access to, it shouldn't take a warrant for information that we can read, and anybody can read who's in the FBI, the intelligence community, to then just use the search bar to organize it in a manner that's more effective for its use.
Yeah, and like you can search for names, you can search for things, but there are a number of, maybe we should talk about that and help people understand what exists and maybe what we want to exist. What is required in that search? So, okay, so somebody at the FBI can search, and it's usually the FBI because they're the domestic law enforcement agency. That of course it's the FBI. And they can search for somebody, right? But they have to believe, they have to have, and now, I'm not sure this was always the case, which I think was the problem. But you tell me, they have to at least have there has to be a connection to foreign intelligence. Like somebody can't be robbing banks. Let's say there's somebody's robbing banks. They don't have the right to search their name in FISA.
Right. And so you're absolutely correct. So the difference between getting a warrant and really the criteria that we currently have, you can't just go use that search bar for anything. And that's where there have been violations, and that's where of protocols, we're strengthening those in our proposal in our bill, and some of them already exist, and that's why they were violations. And that is,
and there's been a lot of internal changes over the last couple of years that a lot of which have been perpetuated by
that have significantly increased the compliance. To hit that search bar, you have to have reasonable belief that the person is involved in something that would result in, as you said, foreign intelligence, and also the issue of national security. There's a threat, that there's a risk before you go that extra step. Now, one of the things that Darin was instrumental in as we looked to constructing the new restrictions is we have also limited not just the reason to use the search bar, but who can. We've taken out 95% of the people at the FBI who were using that search bar to make it a very small, exclusive, well-trained, and held accountable, and people who, their jobs are on the line, and also there are criminal violations for violating provisions of FISA.
I told you guys 30 minutes, but
I would just say to the chairman's point, we go from roughly 6,600 FBI agents and analysts. We reduce that by 95% to hold the FBI accountable. And by the way, the FBI doesn't like many of our reforms and push back on us. One kind of simple analogy to your earlier point on the warrant requirement. To put it in perspective, if you're a police officer in the United States and it's midnight and you're watching a car in front of you swerving going down the road, you clearly have probable cause to pull that car over. When you pull that car over, you can run the license plate, you have probable cause. What the Judiciary Committee is asking for in a warrant is saying, you can't go up to the car. You got to go to a judge and get a warrant before you can go to the car. Doesn't make sense. Doesn't work practically here in the United States on that situation. And getting back to my analogy with Qasem Soleimani, when a U.S. citizen sends a text message to him, you shouldn't have to go get a warrant to look in Qasem Soleimani's database to find out what that email said.
Right. And so based on a lot of these potential reforms, you end FISA as we know it, or we disagree so much that the reauthorization lapses. That's a terrifying prospect. I've said a lot of the antics up here. I can still sleep at night usually because the world keeps turning. Let's be honest, despite all of the clown shows that we see on various subjects. This one would be pretty scary. This one, we see most of the things we know and deter and stop at our southern border, on the cartel side, or foreign terrorism, or just knowing about what all of our adversaries are doing. I hear 50%, I hear 75%. It depends on exactly the issue, but it's an enormous amount is derived from that authority. So it's kind of a terrifying prospect if that just disappears, because frankly, people on both sides of the aisle here have misrepresented what the capability is. I mean, this is post Snowden era, for sure. Snowden went out, in my opinion, and just lied about what his capabilities were as an NSA analyst. He had a sense of aggrandizement, I think, that really warped people's sense of what the intelligence community does and what it's capable of.
Well, and to follow that point, Snowden has endorsed the judiciary bill, the Jordan Nadler bill, and has come out in opposition to the Intelligence Committee's bill that Darin led.
The guy who fled to Russia. Yep, that guy.
He tweeted his opposition to our bill and his support for their bill from Russia.
Yeah. That's a good endorsement. Yeah. Anything to add?
Last thing I would just say, if you think about over the last 15 years, whether it's Osama bin Laden, al-Baghdadi, Qasem Soleimani, or al-Zawahiri that we just took out on a missile strike in Afghanistan, if it wasn't for the ability of 702 and FISA, I'm not sure we could have killed all 4 of them.
No, not a chance. And like nobody hears about things that are deterred or stopped for good reason. And you know, I think people should know the truth about this. So you'll see this debate continue to pop up. Darin, Chairman, thank you for being on. Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Dan.